Hello from New York. We're here at the Formula E final doubleheader. We're recording just before the first race. So if Jeff has won the title, we don't know it yet. When I said I was coming to New York, I asked if there's anything you wanted to know, and you sent me a bunch of questions. So I thought the best thing to do was talk to Hazel, who's basically knows everything about Formula E and has been reporting it for like 3 seasons now.
Too long.
Far too long.
Yeah.
And ready for a big break. But before then...
Before then, I'm going to answer some questions about Formula E.
Yeah, which I wrote down here. These are no one particular questions. They're sort of like amalgamations of general questions people asked. Because I know a lot of you have only vaguely watched it, if at all. So what better time to get into it than the last race of the season?
Well, you've got the whole summer break to catch up. You can go online, you can watch virtually all the full races that are available on YouTube. And you can...
All right, question one, Hazel. I think it's a bit of misunderstanding. People think of Formula E as a spec series where all the cars are identical, but what actually can be changed between the cars? What the teams...
So I think people think of Formula E as a spec series because there is a spec chassis. The series commissions and defines the chassis. The chassis is supplied by a specialist company called Spark, who basically just make Formula E cars. They're the only company to specialise in electric race cars, specifically single-seaters. And so all of the cars, to some extent, the chassis and the outer look of them looks the same. And then obviously the teams put a livery on it. So you could look at them and be like, wow, those are all the same car, in a similar way to, say, Formula 2, or to some extent... like IndyCar has a defined chassis, then you assume maybe that what's inside is then the same. There's also a spec battery, so there are some things that are the same within the car. The battery is supplied again by the series. The Generation 2 one is done by McLaren. The previous one was done by Williams, so they're not going out and creating their own energy stores the same way you can in Formula 1. Basically, because all of those things keep the costs down, they keep the manufacturing down, so there's less waste. So basically, it's easier to regulate and make the series fair. It's also more environmentally friendly, and it makes the series much more straightforward for teams to come into and compete in, which was the whole idea. But then the things that actually make it go, so the powertrain, don't call it an engine. Someone called it an engine in a round table yesterday and I nearly threw my notebook at him. It doesn't combust, but the powertrain, which is the motor generator unit, that takes power off the battery and delivers it to the car to make it go, and then also regenerates electricity from the brakes and puts it back into the battery. Those are completely possible to create. So teams make them, manufacturers make them. So there's one privateer team that makes their own Dragon, and otherwise basically everyone's a big manufacturer. They then make their own software that manages that. They make their own maps. They make their own like everything that makes the car go, and they can even, so we've moved to brake-by-wire this year, and they can make their own brakes. So almost all the teams are using Brembo brakes, but one team, DS to Cheetah, is using their Citroen Rally brakes because they make good rally brakes, so why not put them in a Formula E car? It's a very different series, but seems to be okay. You could think it's a spec series because the cars do outwardly resemble each other. To be honest, I don't actually think F1 cars look that wildly different from each other that people are that aware of it. But the cars themselves, basically everything that makes them go is completely defined by the teams and is totally individual.
There's been a fair bit of opening up of how much they're allowed to develop since the first season, when it was pretty much a spec series in season 1 just to get
it was absolutely a spec series.
And then as time went on, they allowed teams to bring their own interpretations. And even before this generation of car, there's quite underneath the shell is quite amazing how different some of the powertrains and transmissions were, because we had wild divergence in how many gears people were using, and it's now now one gear now. Everyone sort of. But we've had twin engines and single engine.
Motors. into the Hudson. You get a lot of teams tried and failed with what a lot of people call twin pancake motors. So where you've got a motor for each back wheel, basically, which in theory would give you much better torque. So electric cars are super quick off the line because they've got that instant torque. They don't have to fire up an engine and get it to sort of catch up to the movement. And two would, in theory, do that even better than one.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to go through a gearbox if it's just doing each wheel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it also makes them heavier, so generally that hasn't really worked out for teams.
This is a question I actually hear quite a lot generally whenever I speak about Formula E. Why do we insist on racing in city centres and not on proper racetracks?
So you can see the boats. So Formula E, I think there's this perception that Formula E is at the moment in its sort of infant form and that it will eventually graduate to proper racetracks. It's not going to do that. That is not the idea. The idea was not to build electric Formula One. The idea was to build something really different that attracted different people to motorsport who probably aren't already engaged with it, and that it went to people rather than being like, hey, come to Silverstone, it's like miles from anywhere and it's really cold, and that it delivers a completely different product from conventional racing in that respect. Racing and sport in general as an event is entertainment. It is not, although there's obviously lots of technology on display, there's lots of technology being tested, ultimately people come here because they like it and it's fun and it gives you them tingly feels, and so Formula E comes to city centres to make it easy for people to attend, basically, but also because city centres are exactly where e-mobility is the sort of crisis point. So Formula One can't race in city centres most of the time because you can't build a bloody great Formula One track in the middle of Paris or whatever. You can't take over a park in Santiago and throw a Formula One track in there. But Formula E can. So all of the tracks are designed to be lightweight. The cars obviously don't make huge amounts of noise. They use road tyres, so they don't need to resurface. They don't use slicks. Well, basically road tyres, and you can get in and out and build the track really super quickly because of the nature of the series, so it takes advantage of that. Like, don't get it mistaken, Formula One would love to race in the centre of Paris if they could. You see like Formula One where like other series want to have road shows and displays and stuff in city centres. They would love to be here, but they can't. So it makes perfect sense that Formula E takes advantage of its own weird nature.
That makes sense. And on the subject of the circuits, so the second thing people ask is like, why are they so narrow and why do they have no runoffs, and what thought process goes into the design of them? Again, this is sort of related to them being proper circuits or not, and I think they're very different in character.
So they're narrow because they're street circuits and you run out of street, basically. You can't have bits of pavement on the side of your tracks. Formula E cars are much smaller than Formula One cars, so if you don't see them next to each other, you don't necessarily realise, but Formula E cars are like considerably skinnier, even though they look kind of thicker with like 5 seats. And they're much shorter than Formula One cars, so they don't actually need massive circuits. So actually when we go to Monaco it looks hilarious because you have Formula One cars are like, oh god, it's so narrow, and we're like bounding 4 cars wide round the hairpin, so it's basically because in order to get a good location, which is the point, in order to make people more able to attend, they build these ultra challenging circuits. There's nothing actually wrong with narrow circuits. It doesn't prevent overtaking because there isn't quite so much of a dirty air problem in Formula E as in Formula One, because they don't have huge amounts of aero. They don't have exhausts,
Yeah.
so which is quite a big one. They can race right up against each other, sometimes on each other, depending on how closely
Sometimes.
acquainted the drivers want to get. There's nothing wrong with the tracks for the sport. Would more runoffs make it more exciting? No. It's more exciting if the cars, the drivers are on the edge, and if they make a mistake, that's it. Like, your front wing's gone, you've spat your battery out across the track, you feel like a fool, and I'm going to ask you some crappy questions in media pen. Yeah, I mean, I think, in every series, people are like, oh, we want close racing, we want close racing, we want close racing, because it's really exciting. Watching people nearly smash each other out by millimetres is absolutely thrilling. It makes me feel sick with anxiety that my horrible electric sons are going to just smash each other out. And that's why racing is cool.
So, how sustainable are these events? Really, is it just like a superficial shine on the outside about it being electric racing? How do they deal with, the emissions of logistics, and where does the energy come from that powers the cars?
So, there is no sporting event, there is no entertainment event which is carbon positive. Anyone who expects Formula E to be a purely eco event would be sorely mistaken, because that isn't what it is. It is a sporting event, it is an entertainment event, but the logistics are handled by DHL, the build is handled by Formula E and local partners, and all of it is done to neutralise, offset, and try to minimise impact. So most sporting events do not do that. The Super Bowl doesn't worry about its carbon footprint, whereas the Formula E sets out to work towards that, to try and make itself a green event. They put a lot of work into the logistics of making it sustainable, down to things like trying not to use too much concrete and things, obviously trying to minimise anything like resurfacing or any adjustments that have to be made to street furniture. Everything is examined for whether it can be made better, and then DHL do offset the logistics. So the first New York E-Prix here in season 3 was the first completely carbon neutral, totally offset E-Prix. The events themselves are then powered partly by the grid. We're in a city, there's no reason that you can't just plug stuff in, so some of that comes from there. And then Formula E additionally has these generators, which are converted diesel generators, and they run on edible sugar goo. I'll see if I can get you a cup of it, actually. They're usually quite up for making people drink the goo. And you can find videos on YouTube of Formula E employees all being like Alejandro was like, Friday drinks, everybody, look at some goo. It's tasteless, it's just glycerine, it's just made from saltwater algae, which is basically the most green thing you can use. It doesn't take up any land, so it's not converting land to farming, which is a big problem in terms of carbon. It's not using fresh water, and it's these little gooey guys who turn into delicious energy. Also, for honesty's sake, there are some other generators on site by caterers and things in the E-Village that are run on diesel. So is Formula E a net green thing when it comes to a city? No. And this isn't a weak justification. If you walk around the E-Village, then you'll see loads and loads of new technologies. There's lots of power solutions, there's lots of green technologies way beyond just here's the new electric Audi. So it does appear as a technology festival, it appears as an eco festival, it appears to make people think about these things and to consider stuff like carbon costs, and that is actually sincerely, governments and councils and industry bodies are spending millions and millions and millions of pounds trying to get people to engage with that message. So if Formula E gets that across, then actually that is no small green impact.
Onto something completely different. Some people ask, what are the inter-team politics like in Formula E? Is there much of the soap opera that we've sort of seen other older sports like Formula One?
Yeah, so Formula E as a rule has a very friendly paddock. You've probably noticed this walking around, everyone speaks to each other. You know, we just had the Super Bowl session for a pretty important race for the championship, and you know, Jeff was commiserating to Degrassi that they'd both been sent out in a group that wasn't going to see them qualified in front. He was probably also rubbing it in a bit because he was in front of Lucas. But there's no real. Everyone, all of the tents are right next to each other. Our garages are tents. You can hear everything. You can see everything. The drivers all have naps out the back, very much next to each other. They all eat in the same food hall. So do all the teams. So there's not sort of like, it's not like Ferrari style battening down the hatches and secrecy and things. Obviously they don't like text each other pics of their powertrains, and there is an element of like secrecy within that, but it is like generally less paranoid. This year has seen a slight increase in paranoia, partly because the teams are really getting into important part of motorsport, creative interpretations of the rules. Which, you know, that's not wrong. That's the bread and butter of motorsport, and it's how you see small teams suddenly make huge gains and stuff. And they have, you know, the point is to push the technology as far as they possibly can, so they are. And there's been this, like, I personally think quite bonkers rumour / conspiracy theory that Nissan EDAMs had additional flywheels in each of their MGUs, because they had a dual MGU system, and they were making it work, unlike any other team that had used it. That doesn't really massively surprise me, because Nissan do make the best-selling electric car in the world. This is not their first time they built a powertrain. So unlike a lot of teams coming in who had never built a performance powertrain, had never programmed powertrains, had never really plunged R&D money into it, Nissan actually have, and they have for years. So they did come in with a head start. If they had a significant advantage, they would be winning. Oliver and Sebastian are very competitive, they're very fast. It is simply impossible that Sebastian Buemi would not be winning if he had some kind of like secret advantage in his car. I also think it's a bit nuts to suggest that there would be an additional flywheel. So a flywheel is a form of kinetic energy storage. It spins up and then you can take the energy back out of it.
Just did a video on that. So.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Look at his video, not my bad explanation. And it would weigh a ton. If you've already got 2 MGUs, why would you put that? Like, there is no need for additional energy this year. Like, teams are not running out of energy, apart from Nissan EDAMs that one time. So, yeah, I don't think that they are doing it, but the FIA have eventually ruled that they can't have two MGUs for next season. So that was probably the beefiest it got. There's been a few incidents this year where I thought teams were overstepping the line or being a bit whiny. I thought Techeetah pushing to penalise Sam Harder in Hong Kong was pretty naff. Formula E is a really tricky series to get the hang of. It's a very, very grueling event day. You know, everything is in one day. You have very little time to finagle stuff. Yes, teams and particularly big manufacturers are going to try and take the piss wherever they can. I personally think the championship does a pretty good job of stopping them and also telling them to stop playing silly buggers when they are.
So next year we got 2 new manufacturers, Mercedes and Porsche. They're sort of coming out a different way. Mercedes is sort of essentially absorbing HWA. How difficult is it for like a new manufacturer to come in and be competitive on this grid? I know we've seen in the last couple of decades how impenetrable it is to get into Formula One and get good. And we know Mercedes and Porsche are big.
So both of them are obviously taking it very seriously. Mercedes, have a pretty proven record in motorsport right now, especially on the kind of electric hybrid end of things. A powertrain is just a souped up bigger MGUK. So, and clearly they can make one of those. So in theory, they could have just sort of bounced in, but that structure, that grueling day, that inability to go away and have your simulator driver rerun every single session and remap everything and reprogram everything and have banks of engineers, just isn't there in Formula E. So you see teams like when Audi took over at Schaeffler, they were a very successful team. Audi come in and they're like, right, we're going to do stuff properly. We're not going to run this like a bunch of like electric cowboys anymore, and just absolutely screwed it, like completely wrecked it for about 4 races. They lost Daniel's first win because they used the wrong part. They broke Lucas's inverter. They frequently didn't get them out in time for qualifying and Superpole and things. It was just a total mess. And that was Audi, who obviously have huge amounts of experience in WEC and DTM. This isn't their first attempt at motorsport. You look at Jaguar, who have had a phenomenal season this season, really, with Mitch Evans currently third in the championship standings. But they rocked up in season 3 and were just like, oh, we're going to suck. And everyone was like, oh, I don't know. I mean, Jaguar get a bit excited about it. And they did some reasonably fast laps at Donington in testing. And they sucked. They really sucked. That was a dog-awful powertrain that was hopelessly inefficient. And it was amazing that they scored any points. They then made a gigantic step forward, but they basically had to have a clown season on their own account. Whereas Mercedes have decided to do their clown season as HWA and like not put the badge on it. Which I think is quite clever, but you can see from the length of time that it takes teams. So HWA are actually the first team to enter and get a podium on track in their first season since the first season. So yeah, it's really hard. It's hard to get the hang of the sporting regulations. It's hard to get the hang of exploiting the technical regulations. It's hard to just get the hang of the day. It's hard to make sure your drivers are where they're meant to be. It's hard to make sure they're wearing the right underwear. They're dreadful.
Well, you say that's a joke, but genuinely, underwear penalties have been.
Last year we saw quite a number of underwear offences. Lucas wore the wrong underwear in Punta del Este, and both Techeetah drivers wore the wrong underwear in New York and received fines for their troubles. It's because so they have to wear thermals, which it is really warm here.
Yeah.
I certainly I would not like to be wearing any more clothes than I am right now. In fact, I would probably quite enjoy wearing substantially less.
But I want to keep this channel monetized.
I wouldn't have anything to clip my microphone on. And the thermals are obviously literally thermals. They keep them warm. They're also fireproof, so they are a safety thing. And all FIA single-seater championships require them to wear full body length. So the drivers don't like it. Obviously, they get really sweaty when it's warm. There's relatively low chance of fuel fire in Formula E for obvious reasons. So they don't want to put their sweaty pants back on after one session, because obviously back-to-back sessions as well, you don't necessarily have 8 pairs of underwear. I assume the teams now are bringing adequate supplies of pants, especially at a hot race when they really there's a lot of sweat going on, obviously because they're exerting huge amounts of energy. God forbid I could not steer a Formula E car around a corner because there's no power steering and it weighs nearly a ton. So they're doing something intensely physical. It's very warm, it's hot in the race car because the battery can get up to about 88 degrees centigrade. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. They get all sweaty and then they spray each other with champagne, and that just really lifts the sweat, along with the acid champagne smells. Obviously they're very happy, so that's good.
Is Formula E worried about runaway field spread and a small handful of super dominant teams in the way we've seen Formula One and some other series go? If not, what is it doing to mitigate that concern?
So Formula E is very aware of that as a as a thing that can happen. The teams overall are working quite hard with each other, with the championship, to try and stop that. Aside from anything else, nobody really wants an uncompetitive field. Mercedes don't want an uncompetitive field in Formula One because it makes it look easy. Like, it makes the titanic effort they put into winning look like they don't really have to try. In which case, the kind of marketing aspect of being really, really, really good at Formula One kind of decreases. So it's in teams' interest that there's a close field, that there is competition. So there's also a real awareness that they don't want the costs to escalate. People do not want to spend bonkers amounts of money on motorsport. Again, it starts to make the numbers game less good, and also it means that you've got to have such huge setups that it stops being fun, and the point is to be fun. So yeah, there's a lot of work within the teams. There's also an awareness that some teams have less budget than others. At the moment, that doesn't seem to be a particular disadvantage. So Formula E has staff number control. You're only allowed 20 garage staff. You can obviously then have other people who look after your VIPs in emotion and things, but of garage staff, it's a special pass. There's only a certain number of people who are able to work on the cars at any one time. And so that does keep it down a little bit. And then if you, like Audi and Vauntry, sell your car to another team, then it has to be below a certain price. I can't remember what it is, but it's less than $1 million. So there is a degree of control there, and we have seen customer teams routinely beat. I mean, Techeetah absolutely roundhouse kicked Renault in the face last season with their own powertrain, which Techeetah are a very small team, very inexperienced compared to Nissan Edams, or then Renault Edams. And yeah, it's just a case of being canny with what you have rather than sort of spending your way to a championship.
God, I can't imagine a Renault Works team being beaten by their customer team.
It's in the teams in the championship's interest. It's something that is being routinely looked at.
Yeah.
You can see how much the teams are pushing for a cost cap in F1, how quick manufacturers are to drop programs that are very expensive, even when they're successful.
Yeah.
So it's critical to the survival of the sport that they make sure that you can get in, you can get off the line, like running as it were. And stuff like the spec chassis and things do contribute to that.
Do you think it's in Formula E's interest to allow privateer teams to feel they can come in and be competitive? Because obviously we're seeing a lot of manufacturers over the last 2 years, and now we're basically dominating the field in terms of numbers.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think it is in their interest. It's certainly in Dragon's interest to say. So Jev owns part of his team, Techeetah, and he owns the entry for Techeetah, as far as I'm aware. And one of the things he really wanted to do was buy a Formula E entry, because when he came into the championship, he was like, "Oh, I think this is going to be worth more." So he did, and I can't actually remember the figure, but he said like it increased by like manifold, and so probably sounds harsh. But I promise I'm not trying to be. It's just how much these entries are worth, given that there is only 12 of them. The most expensive thing Dragon have is probably their entry.
Yeah.
The entry doesn't cost that much to pay the championship, but if Porsche want to buy one, then they've got to find a slot. So you've got to pay someone to get out of it.
Yeah.
Well, actually they don't, because there is one spare slot.
The last.
Yeah. I mean, basically, if it's got something cool and people want it, it's going to cost more.
Economics.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that sort of about covered like the general things people are asking.
What do you think of Formula E, Stuart? Like, now you're here. What do you think of the paddock?
I think the one sort of one of the most unique things about it is it's very open and friendly, and you can talk to anyone. There's not it's not hidden away in the way a lot of sports are, a lot of motorsports are. It's even though everyone's competitive, it feels like they're all in a project together that they want to succeed.
Yeah.
Whereas you could argue there are people in Formula One who would burn the whole sport to the ground to get a competitive advantage. Not naming names, but
How dare you accuse Robert Kubica?
but I mean, I would definitely recommend anyone to come here. It's very open. I'm lucky enough to have one of these, so I can wander behind certain gates. But otherwise, you know, there's plenty to see. It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
And again, it's designed and packaged to be very digestible. If you only want to watch the race, it's only 45 minutes long.
Yeah.
If you watch the whole thing, it's all on one day. Apart from this, when we're doing 2 days. But yeah. And if it's in your town, you could probably just walk there, like I did this morning, rather than getting on a coach to Silverstone, like you said.
Yeah.
And next year it's coming to London.
It is.
And I'll be there.
And I'll be there as well, because it's basically in my house.
Yeah. Cool. Should we go and watch
let's go and
possibly
watch the car.
championship deciding race?
Yeah, I guess we'll give it a go.
Yeah.